Having said that, if you think I'm still not keeping score, then I have some bad news for you.
Exodus 21:20, when a slave owner strikes a male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished. It's not saying precisely what type of punishment, probably because it would differ depending on whether this was a debt slave, who would usually be an Israelite, or a chattel slave, who would usually not be an Israelite. If it were an Israelite, the penalty might be capital punishment. If not, probably just a fine.
Oh my goodness. Remember when I told you we were going to pin that thing up there to talk about later? So Dan likes to know what Hebrew words or what words originally meant in the Hebrew language. We know that. I find it particularly ironic that at this particular fork in the road, we're supposed to accept, I just don't know what it means. I mean, we don't know what it means. Nobody knows what it means. It could mean anything when Dan knows exactly what it means. And I know that he knows exactly what it means because he covered it in a video a couple months ago, which we did a video response on. So just to help jog the memory a little bit, here's Dan explaining to us exactly what that word punished means in the original Hebrew language.
Frank's actually referring to a specific passage in Exodus 21. That passage where it talks about beating a slave with a stick, where if he dies immediately, then the slave will be avenged.
So we do know what that word means. It means avenged. Now, there's a particular reason why Dan is avoiding admitting that, and we're going to get to that, but first I want to let him finish making his claim, and then we're going to deal with it as a whole.
But if the slave survives a day or two, there is no punishment, for the slave is the owner's property. And the rationale here is that if a slave owner beats a slave immediately to death, that was probably a beating with an intent to kill. That is considered something punishable. But if the beating was disciplinary or corrective, and the person only passed away after a couple of days, then that means it was probably accidental, it wasn't intentional. And in the case of an enslaved person, there is no punishment at all. So, accidental homicide of an enslaved person, you're in the clear.
You were anything but clear. You were dead. Now, we covered this extensively in a video that we did 2 months ago, and Dan posted his original video that we just clipped, showing you that he knew what that word meant. So if you want the full breakdown, I think it's like a 25-minute video on what that word means and the evidence behind it, then you can check out the link in the description and watch it, because it's a great video to watch and it has a lot of information in it. But just to hit on the bullet points so I don't have to paste a 25-minute video in here, if a master beat a slave to death, then the slave was to be avenged, meaning that somebody from the community would be designated as the avenger of blood, and they would seek out the master or the slave owner and kill them in retributive justice for the slave. And this is whether the death was accidental or intentional. And it also didn't matter if the slave died immediately or if they survived for a day or two and then died later. Now, again, I don't just want to preach dogma and basically say you have to believe what I tell you. So we're going to once again go and look at Halot and see what that has to say. So if we go over to Halot and we look at the verbal root of the original Hebrew word, as well as the stem particularly used in that specific verse, we find just that it means vengeance or blood vengeance. This means that the master himself who beat his servant to death would then be subject to judicial vengeance. And the lexical and nominal data for blood vengeance shows this point to be execution or capital punishment, not merely a fine or a reprimand. So for Dan to sit back and say, well, it might be a fine or a punishment, we just don't know, is again a lie. I think it's important to again mention that Dan is a very smart guy. In no way am I insinuating ever that Dan is not intelligent. He's actually extremely intelligent, which is how he's able to pass these fabrications and these lies off as facts. He's much more educated than I'll ever be, but just because somebody has an education doesn't mean that we should swallow their dogma without actually looking at the evidence first. So not to rub it in, but we do have to once again update the scoreboard. We now have data with a 5-0 lead and dogma in danger of a complete shutout.